Wall Street Wrap-Up is supported by Bamboolas, featuring live music and coming soon, tapas and wine upstairs. Bamboolas, the heartbeat of Frenchman Street.
This week on Wall Street Wrap-Up, President Biden and congressional leaders meet at the White House to try to hammer out an agreement on raising the debt ceiling. And talks continue next week, but will it get done by the deadline of June 1st? And because of this, tonight, I'll be talking with Senator Bill Cassidy on the debt deal, the chances of a default, and trying to save Social Security from their default. Senator Bill Cassidy will be here this evening. The Consumer Price Index was released for April. We'll tell you if the Federal Reserve continues to raise interest rates, are they doing any good? Title 42 this week ended, and if you thought the flood of illegals rushing the southern border was a lot before, well, as they say, you ain't seen nothing yet. And ousted Fox News host Tucker Carlson has announced a comeback. We'll tell you more. I'm Andre Laborde. We've got these stories, and we'll take a look at how your money did this week. It's Friday, and it's time for Wall Street Wrap-Up. Well, debt ceilings, open borders, new inflation numbers, and we'll tell you how your money did this week as well. I'm Andre Laborde. Hi, welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up. It's Friday, May the 12th, 2023. Well, this week, the leaders of both chambers of Congress met with President Biden at the White House to try to come to an agreement on extension of the federal debt ceiling that is going to be hitting its limit in just 2 weeks from now, on June the 1st. Now, that's according to Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. Now, that's not an exact date because coming right after that, on June the 15th, is when corporate tax receipts are due. So the Treasury will be having more money coming in 2 weeks after her June 1st date deadline. Now, both sides are going nose to nose and seeing who's going to blink first. So we'll be discussing that with Senator Bill Cassidy coming up in just a minute. But first, how did our money do this week? Well, it was the fifth straight negative day for the Dow Jones. Both the Dow and the S&P 500 had their second consecutive negative week. Top sectors for today were staples, utilities, and communication services. But the NASDAQ, they edged higher for the week. The top S&P stocks are First Solar, News Corp, and NRG. And the sector laggards for today were the discretionary, the financials, and technology. And this week, the Dow Jones closed today at 33,300, down 1.1% for the week. The S&P 500 closed today at 4,124. They just eked out a plus. And the NASDAQ, they closed today at 12,284, up 0.4 of a point for the week. April CPI numbers were released this week, and inflation is going down. Now, the market was expecting the CPI to be coming in year over year at 5%, but actual numbers were lower at 4.9%. And the core CPI, which is excluding food and energy, the two areas that economists feel are most volatile, well, that came in as expected at 5.5%. And speaking of volatile areas as energy and food, gas has gone down since April of last year, but electricity, well, that's up almost 8.5%. Utilities have gone down, and fuel oil is also down to just over 20% from April of 2022. And the Federal Reserve had their latest meeting last week, raising interest rates another 25 basis points to 5%. And it looks as if, well, these hikes, though painful, have been doing some good, because this is the first time in 2 years that the CPI is now below 5%. Well, if you've been to the grocery lately, food doesn't come cheap, does it? Well, but it seems to be going down overall, and according to the CPI for food, eggs are still high at just over 21%. But as the CPI from April of last year to now have been going down, what's not factored into these numbers are your particular grocery store expenses, such as delivery cost, labor cost, and other food distributor costs that they incur. Now, stocks are on the move. Now, here are 5 stocks that, well, they don't get much attention, but should certainly get more love than the favorites that we many times do discuss. Eli Lilly's diabetic drug, Mounjaro, has been found to also help in curbing obesity. Now, that stock, Eli Lilly, is now up 27% in the last 3 months. And 40% of adults are obese. And in fact, there are 2 states that list half of their adults as obese. Next is B. Riley Financial. Now, that stock is up 32% in just 1 week alone, and they reported revenues up 75% from just 1 year ago. And they bought assets recently of a restructuring firm, and it's paying off now with that stock up 32% this week. Well, is everyone buying an EV? Well, don't tell the Kentucky-based company Valvoline. Their stock is up 12% this week at an all-time high. Plus, they've announced a big stock buyback. Have you ever heard of a drink maker called Celsius? Well, no, neither have I. But they've got a Pepsi partnership popping the stock. That plus they've raised their price targets by multiple stock analysts. Their stock price has soared. They've soared 50% in just 1 month. Also, Molson Coors is gaining momentum with a stock price rising over 20% in just 1 month. Now, we've reported the problems that Bud Light is having with their marketing and Dylan Mulvaney on the cans. Coors has taken advantage of this. You know, as Napoleon one time said, never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake. Plus, the company, well, they're celebrating their 150th birthday. And you know what? They don't look a day over 140. Well, this week's debt ceiling talks were top concern, and finally, leaders from both sides they're talking. This week, Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy and President Biden met along with the leaders of the Senate to come to a debt ceiling agreement. Talks will continue next week. Now, think of the debt ceiling maybe as a kidney stone. You know it's going to pass, but how much pain will there be until it finally comes out? We shall see. Tonight, we'll be talking about this and more with Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy. Hi, Senator. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to be with you.
Senator, Secretary of the Treasury Janet Yellen has given June 1st as the drop date of when a debt ceiling is going to have to be raised because the country will be hitting that ceiling. Do you think, is that just a nebulous number that is going to be going either forward or could be backward?
No, for sure. I do know that for every month that the president continues the pause on student loan indebtedness, it subtracts $5 billion from our borrowing authority. And so there are some things that if they decide, well, maybe we're not going to do that this month, it could actually push that date longer. But on the other hand, I'm not going to call it chicken. I'd certainly like to get the debt ceiling deal done or see it get done before the date that Secretary Yellen states.
You know, also, Senator, I'm thinking too, because I think corporate tax receipts are going to be coming in on June 15th, just 2 weeks from after her date of June 1st. So there will be a lot of revenue be coming in on the 15th of June as well, too. So I'm curious if that would have any effect.
Point well taken. And you can see the administration offering a 2-week extension, which would actually be a longer extension of raising the debt ceiling. But I'm not trying to guess people's motivation. I'd like to see a deal done. But within that deal, I'd like a beginning of putting our fiscal house in order. And I hope the president actually engages.
Do you find, Senator, that, you can't take politics out of politics, that for about 75 days, the president has not talked to the House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, and now that even though we have like 2 to 3 weeks, a couple of weeks before this June 1st deadline, that if a deal is done too early, that they're worried about upsetting their base?
I've always hesitated to guess motivation. Mm-hmm. But the president clearly is gearing up for re-election. And he's making comments in which clearly he's going to run, both appealing to his base and trying to depict Republicans as not worthy of being in control. Mm-hmm. And so this would feed into a narrative. Now, the problem is one, we know that our national debt is unsustainable, that debt ceilings are often when decisions are made about how to control it. And 3, he's kind of playing chicken. There is a pragmatic dynamic. Kevin McCarthy has got a very fractious Republican House of Representatives, But within that fractious House of Representatives, he's had people vote for a debt ceiling increase who have never done so in their congressional career. So we got to give a tip of the hat and then encourage the president to actually engage. I know you're running for reelection. I know it's a great issue for you, but it really is something we got to address. So, Mr. President, please engage.
So then, if the House has already passed their debt ceiling, and this is for a 1 year, now it's up to the Senate. And would I assume correctly that Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer won't even bring it up to a vote of the
I
president?
don't quite know, but it doesn't really matter. The president's got to sign something into law no matter what. And so if the president's not going to sign it into law, Schumer can do what he wants. If he brings it up and it goes down because all the Democrats vote against it, that's no different than if he passes it. The president so far has refused to engage. He says he won't sign anything unless it's exactly what he wants, but he's not, that's just untenable. When you're a leader, you recognize the political dynamic, you step forward, you say, listen, we've got a problem with our nation's debt. I want to do something about it, and at least have some way in which we can feel as if he's addressing the issue. Now, Senator Schumer may bring it up or may not. It puts his team, his guys up for reelection in a bad light. You're not voting for fiscal policy that would otherwise balance our budget. But I can't imagine those politics. I just want the president to engage, show some leadership.
You've got some senators on the other side of the aisle, and offhand I'm thinking of people like, let's say, Joe Manchin from West Virginia, Kristen Sinema from Arizona, or even John Tester from Montana, that will probably that they're Democrats, but they're in red states. That they're going to be up for some probably tight elections this coming election season next year. Do you think that they may have a probability of finding religion and voting more toward the other side?
Well, anytime you have a vote like this, which actually kind of makes sense to a conservative base, it's actually a good vote for them. But that's politics. Mm-hmm. I would go back to the debt ceiling. I feel like we have to move beyond the politics of it. I feel like we have to move to let's seriously consider the debt ceiling. You can't separate it entirely from politics because we just talked about the House Republicans, but you got to do something. You've just got to address it. And so we can talk about the politics in the Senate with the President of the United States to show leadership. If the president worked out something with McCarthy, I have no doubt that Schumer would bring it up and that it would pass. Without the president engaging in McCarthy and without that conversation between the president and Schumer, nothing happens. So the president needs to show leadership.
I know Senator Mike Lee from Utah had a letter signed by, I think, 43 senators, and he even said that there were a couple of more that didn't actually sign on, but that would go along with it, that they were refusing to vote for a debt ceiling increase without certain cuts. First off, do I have that right? And were you one of the 43 that signed on to the letter?
Yeah, the letter said specifically, as I recall, that we would not vote for a clean debt ceiling. I was one of those, and the reason why, the president keeps acting like he doesn't have to negotiate, that he doesn't have to actually meet with Kevin McCarthy and have a discussion, a dialogue beyond repeating, I want a clean debt ceiling. And somehow the Senate was going to pull the chestnuts out of the fire. I signed the letter to send a signal to Mr. President, you got to lead. You gotta engage with McCarthy. The Senate can't pull it out because whatever we pass, we have to rely upon House Republicans to find acceptable. I think it's more likely that whatever the White House and House Republicans find acceptable would then pass the Senate. It will not work the other way around. We're trying to send the signal to the president. Mr. President, show some leadership.
One of the things, Senator, that is in the points that the GOP House bill was passed was that any unspent COVID money that has not been released, that has not been spent but voted on to be released, would be going back into the Treasury. Now, I know the White House has already put an end to COVID. The WHO, the World Health Organization, has said COVID has now been over. Do you know offhand how much money are we talking about that has not been?
I've read $50 billion. So significant money. Yeah. And by the way, it's kind of low-hanging fruit. Yeah. The president, we expect him to get something out of this. But the low-hanging fruit, I think, is the $50 billion of unspent COVID money. There's about almost $500 billion, almost a half a trillion dollars related to student loan forgiveness that the president is pushing. Now, knowing that, there's already programs for someone who cannot afford to pay back her student loans. There's already a program that if you lose your job or become disabled, you can have your student loan forgiven. We've already taken care of those folks who can't pay back. He's got another $500 billion worth of programs that the House said, please don't do. I think that would be low-hanging fruit. Now, I'm told that it's very important to the president's political base. We'll go back to where we started. This should be about maintaining the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, as opposed to appealing to a political base as you run into re-election. That's low-hanging fruit. The president could offer that, and it would show his willingness to make a concession.
There've been talk about how the invoking of the 14th Amendment, and the part of the 14th Amendment they're talking about is that the debt of the United States shall never be questioned. And they're saying it as if that they can bypass Congress and just do it by what I assume executive order. First off, is that just talk? But Congress is the one who allocate, and the House of Representatives is the one who allocates money. Can they actually?
I'm totally with you.
Yeah.
I don't know if they can. Put it this way: there's a lot of things that they're doing that they shouldn't do. The Supreme Court is going back to student loans, is hearing arguments on whether or not the president is usurping the power of the purse from the House of Representatives. And Justice Roberts, in his opening remarks, seemed to indicate he truly thinks that they are usurping the power of the purse. That's unconstitutional. So the president may invoke Title 14 and then just say, sue me. And by the time it works up through the courts, he will have worked his will. I think that's wrong. The president takes an oath to support and defend the Constitution, not support and defend it when it's convenient, not support and defend it so I can run for re-election by having programs which are very expensive that appeal to my base, but nonetheless still want to spend the money. No, to support and defend the Constitution. We want the president to lead all the people, not just his political base.
Senator, I want to say, I think it's and correct me if I'm wrong, the current baseline law of 1977. And what it, to my understanding, is when we think of a homeowner, of a viewer, the Cassidy household, the Laborde household, if let's say an imaginary you make $100,000 and you have a 5% cut, well then you have $95,000 to work with. But in government, you automatically have like an 8% increase every year. So that, let's say if you have a 5% cut, you're still 3% higher than what you were the year before. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, there's built-in kind of elevators in terms of the spending for each program. And indeed, people will call it a cut if you merely attempt to temper that built-in elevator. And so there's a lot of funny accounting that goes into the federal budget. If the American people understood that, and when they heard, oh my gosh, Republicans are cutting all these dollars, no, we're cutting the rate of increase. And the idea is that when cash is when dollars are relatively scarce, you've got to figure out how to prioritize the dollars that you have. There's not been that effort on behalf of the administration. The House Republicans are trying to force that on them. It's what every household does, the Laborde household, the Cassidy household, the Smith household. We need the president to do it for our collective household.
Yeah. Do I understand correctly, and also, like, let's say the Veterans Administration, in the president's budget, that there's a 22% increase? Well, what Speaker Kevin McCarthy wants is to go back to 6 months ago of fiscal year 2022 to all the same levels. Well, they're saying that the House GOP wants to cut the VA 22%, but that was the increase that was put into the budget. So the money was never there last year. It was only hopefully allocated for the following year of the fiscal year 2024, I guess. Would that be somewhat what you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The president is billing it as if what he is asking to be in his budget is actually the baseline, what we're cutting from. In reality, the VA has far more money than it's ever had, just to take that specific example, and the president wants to increase it another 22%. And the House Republicans are saying, can we afford it? And by the way, we can still adequately meet the needs of the veterans with the resources that are there, more than adequately meet those needs. So, Mr. President, lead. Don't just sit and demagogue the issue. Don't mislead the American people. Please lead.
Senator, the Social Security Trust Fund is, to my understanding, going to be running out of money in 2033. Now, that's only 10 years from now. And as we know, when we look at 10-year intervals, we don't even know if it could be even earlier than that. Now, the way I understand it is that you've got a proposal or a thought to be able to help save Social Security, when it has dealing with the stock market. What is that?
It is going insolvent Social Security, and when that happens, there'll be a 24% cut in benefits to someone who is receiving Social Security at that time. No one's grandfathered in. Someone who depends upon Social to pay her bills, she will have a 24% cut. We're trying to prevent that. And a way to address it would be to create an investment fund separate from Social Security, not using Social Security money at all, separate and parallel, and invest that in the strength of the American economy. Let the strength of the American economy benefit all Americans. And over time, the compounding effect is such that that would address 75% of the shortfall in the social plan. It would also eliminate the 24% cut. Under our idea, you eliminate the 24% cut. Now, we need presidential leadership to make up the additional 25%. We got 75% addressed. We eliminate the 24% cut, but we need presidential leadership to help us get over the next 25%.
Now, Senator, the way I understand this, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that this proposal will not be interrupting anything in the Social Security Trust Fund, correct? This is
Correct.
Totally separate? Where will this money come from?
Totally separate, and that's point of negotiation.
Okay.
We could either take tax dollars and put it there, or we could borrow the money to put it there and allow the kind of growth over time to pay back the money that is borrowed. But that's what is subject to negotiation.
And it'll be put into stock?
Plot it out.
It'll be put in stock and mutual funds?
You can put it in, you can put investments. Yes, absolutely.
Who would?
And by the way, that's what every other pension fund does. The Canadians do it. The Norwegians do it. I mean, you can go down the list of states and countries that do it, and they do it because the strength of the American economy is able to address their needs much more so than investing in treasuries or keeping it in
Do you
cash.
know any idea of who would be in charge of the managing of this stock fund?
We have a set of directors that would be at arm's length from Congress. It would be audited every year with the audit put online. And we have other safeguards to keep Congress from messing with it. But this is kind of what the federal government already does with other funds, which are managed in the same fashion. This is already being done with the Federal Railroad Retirement System, and also the Thrift Savings Plan, which is the savings plan for federal employees. So we're already doing this. All we're doing is applying this concept to Social Security.
So to reiterate, this will not be, a dollar will not even be touched from the Social Security Trust Fund. This is something totally separate, being put into investing into stocks, into U.S. stocks. Correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Right.
And by the way, in our plan, we don't tax seniors, we don't cut their benefits. Period. End of story.
Senator, thank you so much. I hope you come back.
Hey, thanks for having me. I look forward to seeing you in New Orleans again.
Thanks a lot, Senator. Well, if you have a question or maybe a comment about the show, we'd love to hear from you. Make it concise, make it pithy, and write us and notice the new email address at andre@benacapital.com. So let's take a look at the markets heading into next week. But first, what national holiday was started by President Woodrow Wilson in 1914 on the second Sunday of May? We've got the answer in just a moment. Well, what national holiday was started by President Woodrow Wilson in 1914 on the second Sunday of May? Mother's Day. Well, You've heard of politics making strange bedfellows? Last year, $788 million was traded last year in stock securities by members of Congress. Now, that's 1 in every 4 members of Congress are involved in these disclosed trades. Florida Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz and Democrat, well, actually she refers herself to as a socialist, New York's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who may not even agree on what day it is, well, they do agree on stopping members of Congress trading while in office. Now, the bill being presented will prohibit owning individual stocks, but can hold diversified mutual funds. Now, the bill is called the Bipartisan Restoring Faith in Government Act. Now, this would prohibit members of Congress from trading stocks and making financial investments while in office. It would also apply to congressional spouses and their dependents. Well, they finally agree on something. You know, they say even a broken clock is right twice a day. Well, let's have a wrap up on Wall Street. Ousted Fox host Tucker Carlson this week announced he'll be returning to Twitter. A specific day for the show has not been revealed, but according to Carlson, it's going to be starting soon. Now, there's been so much speculation of whether, after being fired from the top-rated primetime show on Fox News, where will he be going? Carlson is receiving a reported $20 million a year, and Fox News, by the way, is still paying him. Some believe just to keep him off the air so that they can build a new audience with a new host. Fox's audience during his 7 p.m. time slot has dropped 60% since Tucker's firing on April the 24th, and that drop has now extended to just over 20% overall in their whole primetime lineup of Fox. So, what does Carl Jr.'s, Hardee's, and Wendy's all have in common? Well, besides burgers, of course, they're all getting into the AI, artificial intelligence business with helping in ordering, and found that they can have a machine to actually ask, would you like fries with that? Peloton is recalling 2.2 million exercise bikes due to safety hazards and concerns. The bike seat post can break while in use and can cause injury to a bike user. Now, that's the second major recall the bike maker has faced. Well, a new estimate based on April's CPI will have Social Security cost of living adjustment could be much lower next year. The adjustment next year is expected to be 3.1% for 2024, rather than the 8.7% for 2023. Now, the buying power for senior citizens has dropped by 36% since 2000, with the greatest increases coming from eggs, heating oil, and prescription medication. And that's a wrap-up on Wall Street Wrap-Up. So, how will stocks fare for the remainder of the year? Where should you invest if we have a recession? You won't want to miss next week when we talk with the Chief Global Investment Strategist, Charles Schwab, Jeff Kleintop. That's next week, Jeff Kleintop. And that's our show for this Friday, May the 12th. Our thanks to Senator Bill Cassidy for being a guest with us tonight, but always, it's you we appreciate for allowing us into your homes this evening. So, have a fun weekend with the ones you love and a productive week ahead. And by the way, happy Mother's Day to all the mothers in our audience. I'll see you next week. Remember, if it's Friday, it's Wall Street Wrap-Up. I'm Andre Laborde, and remember, money never sleeps. Good night.
Wall Street Wrap-Up is supported by Bamboolas, featuring live music and coming soon, tapas and wine upstairs. Bamboolas, the heartbeat of Frenchman Street.